Hey, what's up everybody? Thanks for joining us for another review. Today we're going to be talking about the Norco Fluid C1. We've got Nick along with us who actually bought the alloy version of the fluid that we tested earlier in the year, and we're going to bring him in for some feedback comparing the carbon versus the alloy bike. So let's get into this all-around trail ripper. If you're looking to just get straight to the ride performance out on the trail, you can skip, fast forward, we'll put in chapters so you can get to that feedback. But right now we're going to talk a little bit about frame details, features, and all the different models available. There are obviously quite a few different bikes available in the fluid line from both the alloy to the carbon, so we'll briefly touch on those first. If you missed it, several months back we went really in depth and did a dissected feature on the alloy fluid and the redesign, all the effort that Norco went through to make a bike that's affordable with a ton of features offering size specific, weight specific details that's usually reserved for bikes that cost a lot more. So the alloy models obviously retail from $19.99 up to $39.99. The carbon obviously is going to increase price. There is a frame set available for $25.99, but a complete bike starts at $4,099, so $4,100 up to $59.99 here, with a model in between at $49.99. So weight difference, 600 grams is the claimed savings on the front triangle. Also stiffness and ride characteristics change quite a bit. We've brought in Nick to share a little bit of his experience on the bike. He actually purchased the alloy fluid that we had earlier in the year. He liked it so much and thought it was such a good deal that he bought it. It is now his personal bike. So he was one of the three guys that put time on the carbon fluid, and he definitely noticed the weight savings as well as the stiffness change. Not always for the better, but the weight reduction was always appreciated. The stiffness was nice on the climbing. It could be a little fatiguing for some riders in certain terrains, but the stiffness also was beneficial in like nice hard berms, corners, jumps, or other times where you'd really want a nice stiff frame that gives you some good feedback. So moving over to the similarities that carry across from the redesigned Norco fluid, we'll talk about their ride-aligned philosophy as well as some of the geo and suspension tuning philosophies. The one-piece rear rocker link carries over. The aluminum chainstay or rear triangle also carries over from the alloy bike. It is just a carbon front triangle. Also, again, ride-aligned, which is Norco's basically tuning and sizing concept. And essentially what that means, and we've gone into it in detail, we'll link it below, but they're working on center of gravity, weight distribution, and suspension tuning and kinematics for different length, different proportions, and different weight riders. So obviously a size small rider is going to get shorter chainstays, a different C-tube angle, and also a different suspension tune, because typically they're going to have a little bit lower weight and different leverages and compression demands than a 6'4" rider who's going to be on a much bigger bike with longer limbs, you know, creating more torque and leverage and more compression mass usually. So it's really cool philosophy and it's really neat. It's a costly endeavor, right? Instead of just stamping out one rear triangle for every size and every bike, they're having to create different molds, different parts for everyone to make sure that they get the best ride that they can. Similarly, they're working with shock tuning through each shock provider, right? Each different level of bike has a different shock, from Rock Shocks to Suntour to Fox, depending on your spec and level. And they're working to develop tunes with those companies for different weights and different shocks. So really cool, and something that I think goes a long way out on the trail. So along with the effort that Norco takes to offer size specific consideration to these bikes. There's a couple of other nicely thought out features. The cable routing integration into the front of the triangle is nice, offers a pretty good weather resistance. Obviously it's the very front end of winter, so we haven't really ridden in a ton of mud or rain, but so far we've been impressed. The bike has remained rather quiet, and these are all nice, tight fitting, and it's a really cool looking entry port. You've got a nice shuttle pad protection here on the bottom of the down tube, and also a larger rock and log striking protection pad. You've got a threaded bottom bracket, and other care has been given to high wearing pivot points, bearings, shock mounts, etc., to ensure the bike lasts a long time and is protected, as well as being easily serviceable. So speaking of geo, this is a 130/140 do-it-all trail bike, and the numbers I would say represent that quite well. There's a couple things that stand out, but I think they work to the bike's advantage for the type of riding we like to do. I guess obviously geo, luckily, is very personal, and lots of brands offer different geometries to suit your terrain and riding style. So we opted for the size large. I'm 5'11", most of our testers are 5'10" to about 6'2", and we all found that this bike size fit us rather well. The reach on the size large sits at 480 millimeters. The rear center or chainstay length is 435 on the size large. We've got a 1,245 millimeter wheelbase with a bottom bracket height of 348 and a stack height of 635 millimeters. Both of those two numbers are a bit high compared to some others out there, but we'll talk about those in the ride characteristics. Head tube angle sits at 65 degrees, and the seat tube angle is 76.7 degrees, again on the size large. So let's move into ride impressions and what stood out to us from a spec level out on the trail. So Nick, you spent quite a bit of time on the Fluid alloy. You actually bought the bike from Norco. Yep. Talk to us about the carbon versus alloy. What stands out to you?
Yeah, so just rode our typical test track, have ridden my alloy bike in several different builds up that, with a very similar build to this bike, with kind of the aggressive trail setup is what I would say, like 130, 140. The Fluid Carbon is definitely laterally stiffer, lighter in the front end. You can feel the difference of the carbon frame, although the aluminum rear end feels nearly identical. It rewards you with a little bit more pedaling efficiency, I think. That may be due to this RockShox Super Deluxe shock, as it has a better platform in it than what I was running on the other bike. But on the way down, I noticed this bike maybe has a little bit more trail feedback because of the stiff front end. The fork, the bike outrides this fork, so that may just be a difference of what build you want. But the bike in general is light, it's fast, it's very stiff. It's stiffer than the aluminum, both laterally and vertically. And it rewards you with a really nice trail experience.
Okay. And then obviously getting into the value element, right? Like you bought the alloy bike, it was a great deal, you like it. Would you find yourself being tempted to spend the more money to go with carbon? I know during the climb you said between the platform of the shock and the weight reduction.
So this bike really reminds me of the Optic with that carbon light front end, and I love that bike. After riding the aluminum though, I don't think the general consumer is going to say that's worth $1,000 to $1,500 more for a premium that you're getting 90% of the way there with aluminum.
Okay. As I mentioned, we had 3 different riders on this bike, one of which owns and bought the alloy model. He was very impressed. All of our testers agreed that the G2 brakes were a little bit of a disappointment. Obviously, if you've been around our channel much, you know that these brakes are not high on our list of favorites. You know, being that this is a trail bike and the G2 is technically a trail brake, it should work pretty well, but this thing is just so capable and it likes to go so fast. I think that a little bit stronger spec brake would have been a better call. To be fair, we didn't play around with brake pad compounds, so potentially we could have improved the braking power a little bit by swapping brake pad compounds, but nevertheless, I think most of you guys would also agree, if you've ridden G2s, that they're just not all that awesome. We do like the E13 synthesis wheel set on this build. The Vittoria tires were a little bit of a learning curve in some conditions and terrain, but overall, it wouldn't be something that we'd have to rip off immediately. Like, I'd say let's, ride them, let them wear out, and depending, of course, on your terrain and conditions. But I think all in all, they'll work and they do a good job. The one-up bar, the WTB grips, the SDG Tellus dropper post are all things that we really actually liked about this bike. I haven't ridden WTB grips before, but they were pretty nice, comfy, offered some good grip. One-up bars we're obviously a fan of, and the SDG Tellus, it's an affordable, reliable, and a good working dropper, so no complaints there. So the new fluids also have the SRAM UDH and are T-type compatible. This bike has the GX Axis drive unit on it. That was a pretty awesome spec selection, I'd say. You obviously got to pay, right? Because this bike is not quite as affordable as the alloy models, but you're getting a pretty sweet drivetrain, the GX cranks and the full wireless Axis drivetrain. It worked reliably, it shifted, no real complaints at all there. So what stood out to us from a suspension standpoint is the bike is very active, lively, playful. Part of that has to do with the Geo. And part of that has to do with the suspension. The fork was a little bit mixed for our guys. It wasn't great, it didn't suck, but it just didn't like stand out as anything amazing. It worked and it was fine. The rear shock was really awesome. That impressed us a lot. We felt that the pedaling platform was a little better than the Fox equipped bikes on the alloy models. And Nick especially noted that because he's a big climber, likes to put in a lot of miles. So he appreciated that little bit of extra platform out of the RockShox. It's lively, it does a good job of pumping, popping, giving some good platform in corners as well, not just in pedaling. What we did notice is that it is 130 mil travel. Both Nick and I are right around 190 pounds. And we felt like when you were landing big drops, or if we were sending larger jumps to somewhat flatter landings, you could tell it was a 130 bike. And we were squirming down and getting through that travel. On the flip side, the bike, when you really started to hammer and charge over really rough, extended sections of trail, you could also tell it was a little bit shorter travel bike. It just felt a little stiffer, perhaps than the Fox equipped alloy bike. And maybe part of that was the frame stiffness. Maybe part of that was the RockShox or the fork as well. But, it definitely let you know it was a 130 bike and you were hitting extended rough sections. So if you're regularly riding really gnarly rough stuff, chances are you may not be looking at a 130, 140 bike, but if you are, just be prepared. I would say this spec, the RockShox and Carbon is a little bit stiffer and offers a little more feedback than the alloy version with the Fox stuff. Now, where the bike absolutely shines is pretty much everywhere else. It is so nimble. It is fun, it is light. It was just absolutely a treat to move around on the trail. Like, it made you feel like you never want to just sit still and be on the bike going down the trail. We were constantly looking for side hits or things to nose bonk or just slam the back end into. It was just an absolute treat and a very fun bike to ride. We did some sections with guys on longer travel bikes, and they regularly commented how, like, as soon as the trail started to point down, they could just see this bike bouncing around all over the trail and just accelerating and dropping them if we're just coasting, right? A no pedal race kind of a scenario. This bike was like way more fun, active, and playful, and faster. And that was something that was really cool. It's also a lot of fun to jump. That low weight and poppy nature just made it a treat to kind of whip, table, play around with. So a really fun bike. High bottom bracket height was awesome for technical pedaling. Even with the 175 cranks, which I'm not a huge fan of these days, I was not clipping or striking pedals, which we've got a lot of rock and lava rock here in Mend, and there were some technical climbs that I intentionally took some weird lines through without trying to be too cautious of dipping or moving the bike, and I just could keep the power down. The suspension platform was really supple. It doesn't bob excessively, but it allowed for a lot of good traction, and then that higher bottom bracket height meant I could get full power pedal strokes without having to worry about clipping. So let's move into the final thoughts of the Norco Fluid. I would say from a performance standpoint, it is a really fun, lively, and playful bike all around. It's a really good pedaler, and I don't necessarily just mean from like a performance, or I should say from like a efficiency standpoint. I mean from both a comfort, traction, and technical climbing standpoint. It's not like Yeti efficient, but it's also, I would say, more compliant, more comfortable, and will allow you to tackle rocky, chunky, rooty climbs with more ease. So, and again, the bottom bracket height makes climbing awesome over technical stuff. Really maneuverable and playful. So if you like to bob and weave through the trail, if you've got tighter obstacles, if you like to be active and engaging on a bike, it's going to stand out and be a really good option there. It does get a little, I don't know if I want to say overwhelmed, but like it definitely just lets you know it's a 130 bike if you're charging through rough stuff at speed. So if you're doing that extensively or for longer periods of time, there could be more aggressive, you know, smoother bikes in the category. Chances are they'll probably have more than a 140 fork, right? It might be like a 130, 150 kind of a bike or something in that nature. But, you know, I think if those sections are shorter or fewer and farther between, and you can kind of like jump into and out of them, this bike will absolutely reward and is a blast. So moving away from the performance and getting into the value discussion, you know, I know value is always in the eye of the consumer because certain things matter more to certain people. Right now is a really tough time in the mountain bike space and many others. And I think, you know, maybe 6 to 8 months ago, this bike was a lot better value than it is today. I do not think this is a bad value, but there is a lot more competition as bikes have been dropping in price over the months. Chances are you could probably find one of these on sale at a dealer. I think the fact that you are getting a bike from a brand that's being sold at a bike shop, so you've got dealer support across the country. If you're traveling, they might have replacement parts, hardware, someone that will go to bat for you should you have some sort of a warranty or technical issue. So, you know, comparing a consumer direct to a dealer brand, and you're looking at price point, you know, same or within a, you know, $800 to $1,000, I think that would steer me more towards wanting to go with a dealer purchased brand. I think the fact that they offer the ride aligned, you know, size specific stuff on sometimes more affordable bikes where you might get a little better spec or this or that, you're not always getting some of those finer creature comforts or engineering traits that do cost a little bit of money in reality. So I think that's a nice feature about the Norco, but personally, I would stay with the alloy. You know, there is a weight penalty. I like the way alloy bikes ride, and I think they're a really good value right now. Again, I'm gonna cheat and look at my chart here. $39.99 is retail price for the top spec alloy with Fox factory suspension. You know, to me, like $2,000 is a lot of money, and I could go on a pretty sweet mountain bike trip with an extra $2,000. So that might be where I would go. If you love carbon, if you gotta have the Axis T-type, if you like RockShox suspension, I would definitely not hesitate in recommending this bike and thinking that it is an awesome bike for sure. It's a great trail bike all around, like, end of story. But you know, I think for some of the bargain hunters out there, maybe you step down to the C2 at $49.99. That's gonna be a pretty cool bike all around. But the performance speaks. It's a good bike for sure. And you know, again, we usually try to not base our reviews a ton on value, because a lot of that is up to you guys and what matters most to you, and of course how much money you have to spend, because that's not not our expertise, right? We talk about how these bikes perform and how they perform compared to other bikes on the market. So that is the Norco Fluid, guys. Sadly, this green color is not available to us in North America, in the United States. I guess this is a Canadian only color that we were lucky enough to get, and unfortunately we got to send it back to them now. So be sure to ask any questions. Let us know what you guys think. Of course, we love getting involved with everybody down in the comments. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and we hope to see you out on the trails.